The Kelvori homeworld was a quiet place. It had always been quiet. The Kelvori were not a loud people. They did not build massive cities that scraped the clouds. They did not launch 1,000 warships into the stars to show off their power. They were small in number, gentle in nature, and they lived on a warm green planet called Kelvori Prime, deep inside a system of 4 moons that turned slowly around their amber sun. For 200 years, they had been part of the galactic sovereignty. That was the name of the great alliance of species that governed most of the known galaxy. It had hundreds of members, empires, federations, collectives, all bound together by treaties and agreements that had taken centuries to build. The sovereignty had its own council, its own laws, its own fleets. It was supposed to protect its members. The Kelvori had always believed that. They believed it right up until the day the Vorkai came. The Vorkai Dominion was not a new enemy. They had been known to the galaxy for almost a century. They were large, powerful, and they were cruel in a very organized way. They did not attack out of anger or madness. They attacked because they calculated that they could win, and winning was what they did. One by one, over 30 years, they had consumed 12 civilizations. Some fought back, some ran, some tried to negotiate. It did not matter. The Vorkai always came, and the Vorkai always won. When their fleet crossed into the Kelvori system, there was no warning, no message, no demand. Just ships, hundreds of them, appearing at the edge of sensor range like a dark wall moving through the stars. Elder Sathrek was the first official to be told. He was an old Kelvori with deep green scales and eyes the color of pale gold. He had spent most of his long life in service to his people. He had attended sovereignty meetings. He had signed treaties. He had shaken hands, or the Kelvori equivalent of it, with beings from 100 different worlds. He had truly believed, that the sovereignty was a structure worth trusting. When the young soldier brought him the sensor report and placed it on the table in front of him, Sathrek sat very still for a long time. He read the numbers. 340 Vorkai warships, moving at a steady pace, aimed directly at Kelvori Prime. He did not panic. He was too old for panic. He picked up the communication line and called the Sovereignty Council. The line connected after a short wait. A smooth, artificial voice informed him that the council was in session and could not be interrupted. He left a message. Then he sent an emergency transmission, a priority signal that was supposed to bypass all normal channels and reach the council's emergency desk immediately. He received an automated reply. His transmission had been received. Someone would respond within 48 hours. 48 hours. The Vorkai fleet would reach Kelvori Prime in 31. Sathrek closed his eyes. He breathed slowly. Then he stood up, straightened his robes, and walked to the communications tower at the center of the capital. The tower was an old building. It had been built long before the sovereignty, back when the Kelvori were just beginning to reach beyond their own moons. It had tall walls and wide windows, and from the top floor, you could see almost the entire capital city. The low curved buildings, the long green fields at the edges of town, the rivers that caught the amber light of the sun and turned it to something almost gold. Sathrek looked at his city for a moment. Then he went inside and told the communications team what he needed. He needed to broadcast a distress signal, not just to the sovereignty, to everyone. A wideband transmission on every known frequency, aimed in every direction, carrying a simple message. The Kelvori were under attack. They were a peaceful people. They had done nothing wrong. They needed help. The team worked through the night. They built the signal. They aimed it at every major civilization they had contact information for. The Threnai Empire, the Asavari Collective, the Mulran Federation, the Dureshi Commonwealth, dozens of others. They sent it just before dawn. Then they waited. Velnoma was not an important person. She was aware of this. She worked a mid-level communications desk at a sovereignty relay station that nobody had a strong reason to visit. The The station sat at the edge of a quiet sector, mostly processing routine trading notifications and the occasional scientific report. It was not exciting work. It was steady, organized work, and Vel Noma was a steady, organized person. She was a Lasari, a species with thin gray skin, 4 long fingers on each hand, and large dark eyes built for reading screens in low light. She had been working this desk for 6 years. She was good at her job in the way that very careful people are good at quiet jobs. She noticed things, small things. She filed everything neatly. She never ignored a signal just because it looked unimportant. The Kelvori distress transmission reached her station 11 minutes after it was sent. Velnoma flagged it immediately. She pulled up the full message. She read it 3 times. Then she reached for the emergency routing console and began forwarding it to the Council's active attention queue. Not the normal queue, not the 48-hour queue, but the one reserved for genuine crises. The system rejected her request. She blinked. She tried again. The system told her that the Kelvori distress signal had already been received and logged by the Council, and that the matter was under review. Under review. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the signal again. She looked at the coordinates. She looked at the number of Volkai ships. She pulled up the Sovereignty's response database, the log of all active emergency requests and their current status. The Kelvori signal was there. Its status read, pending assessment, secondary priority. Secondary priority. Velnoma stared at that for a long time. She had been working at this desk for 6 years. She had seen how the Council moved. She had seen what pending assessment meant in real terms. It meant that someone somewhere had looked at the Kelvori's situation and decided that the political cost of responding was higher than the political cost of doing nothing. It meant that behind closed doors, in quiet rooms, powerful beings were already calculating whether the Kelvori were worth the trouble. She already knew the answer they were going to arrive at. Because she had seen this before, not with the Kelvori, but with others. She turned back to her screens. The distress signal was still going out. It was broadcasting in every direction, carrying its message into the dark between stars. And as she watched the logs update in real time, she began to see the responses, or rather, the lack of them. The Threnai Empire acknowledged receipt of the signal. They expressed deep concern. They would raise the matter at the next full council assembly, scheduled in 9 days. 9 days. The Asavari Collective sent a formal note expressing their sympathy for the Kelvori people and their strong belief that diplomatic channels should be exhausted before any military consideration was made. The Mulran Federation did not respond at all. One by one, the great powers of the sovereignty went quiet. Some sent polite words, some sent nothing. Not one of them sent ships. Velnoma watched the responses come in and not come in, and she felt something she did not have a precise word for. It was not quite anger. It was not quite sadness. It was the feeling of watching something you always feared was true become true in front of your eyes. She leaned forward and began closing the active monitoring windows one by one. There was no point watching anymore. The signal was dying in the dark. She had her job to finish. She would file the logs, mark the responses, and close out the relay window before the end of her shift. She reached for the last window, the one that was still showing the raw incoming data from the signal's broadcast, and her finger stopped. There was something there. A small entry, almost invisible in the stream of data, an automated acknowledgement ping not from any sovereignty member, not from any known major civilization. It came from a direction that, when she checked against her charts, pointed toward a region of space that was mostly empty on the official maps. Low development space, the outer edge of the Orion Arm. She almost closed it. It was probably a relay echo. Those happen sometimes, a signal bouncing off a station and coming back looking like a new response. Then she saw the timestamp. The acknowledgement had come back in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Velnoma went very still. She knew the distances. She had been working with signal times and distances for 6 years. Whatever had sent that ping was not a relay echo. It was not a passive bounce off some dead station. Something had received the Kael'Vori signal. Something had read it. And something had sent back a confirmation, not a polite note, not a diplomatic reply, not a promise to discuss the matter, just a clean, direct acknowledgement that said, in the simple language of deep space communications, message received, understood, acting. Acting. That one word made her hands stop moving. She pulled the ping source data and ran it through her location charts. The coordinates resolved slowly, overlapping with sparse old survey files from about 40 years ago. A small system, one inhabited planet, a species that the sovereignty had cataloged briefly and mostly ignored. They had been given a standard file, young civilization, early spaceflight, not yet considered significant. The species was called human. The planet was called Earth. Velnoma had never spoken to a human. She had barely read the sovereignty file on them. Nobody paid much attention to Earth. They were a new species, only 80 years into real space travel. They had a handful of colony ships, a few research stations, some small defense vessels. They were considered a minor presence. Background noise. She read the acknowledgement ping again. Then she ran a calculation. If something had already turned around and started moving toward the Kael'Vori system at the moment the ping was sent, how long would it take to arrive? The number on her screen made her blink. She ran it again. Same number. She sat very quietly in her low-lit station, in a part of the galaxy that nobody particularly cared about, and she looked at that number, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something shift inside her chest. She did not close the window. Back on Kael'Vori Prime, the hours moved slowly and heavily. The planetary defense forces, small, under-equipped, designed for border incidents rather than full invasions, were doing what they could. Every ship that could fly was being armed. Every ground installation was powered up. Sathrek had ordered the civilian population away from the coastal cities and into the inland shelters. It was not enough. Everyone knew it was not enough. But they did it anyway, because doing something was better than standing still. The soldiers were young. Most of them had never seen real combat. They moved through their duties with a kind of quiet determination that Sathrek found both admirable and heartbreaking. They checked their equipment. They ran their drills. They did not talk much. Sathrek walked among them sometimes in the long hours before the Voakai arrived. He did not have inspiring speeches to give. He was not that kind of leader. He walked, and he looked at his people, and he felt the full weight of what was coming. He had received the sovereignty's response by now, the careful language, the deep concern, the promise of review. He had read it once and put it away and not looked at it again. He had also received the logs from the communications tower. He had seen the tally of responses from across the galaxy. He was not surprised. He was old enough to not be surprised by this kind of thing anymore. He had always known, somewhere deep and quiet inside him, that when it came to it, the great powers would weigh the cost and find it too high. What surprised him, what he thought about as he stood at the tower window looking out at the amber evening light, was the one small ping that had come back from a direction nobody expected. His communications officer had shown it to him. She was young, barely out of training, and she had looked at Sathrek with wide gold eyes as she explained what the ping meant. He had listened without expression. When she finished, he asked her to show him the coordinates. He looked at the coordinates for a long time. Earth, he had heard the name distantly, the way you hear the name of a small town far away that you have no reason to visit. A young species, new to the stars, not significant according to everyone who had an opinion on such things. They had answered in 4 minutes. Not with words, not with diplomatic language, with a moving ship. Sathrek turned away from the window. He walked back to his desk and sat down. Outside, the sun was going down behind the four moons, and the sky was turning from amber to deep purple, and somewhere out in the dark, 340 Volkai warships were drawing closer with every passing minute. He thought about Earth, about a species he had never met, moving through the dark toward a world they had no reason to care about. He did not know why they were coming. He did not know what they could possibly do when they got here. He did not know if it would matter. But they had answered. In the quiet of his office, with the weight of everything pressing down on him, Elder Sathrek allowed himself one small, private feeling. It was not hope. It was something quieter than hope. It was the feeling of not being completely alone in the dark. He sat with that feeling for a little while. Then he got back to work. Outside, the last light faded from the sky over Kael'Vori Prime, and the stars came out one by one, cold and bright and very far away. Somewhere among them, something was moving, something that had not been asked to come, something that had received a signal and without discussion, without calculation, without asking what it would cost, had simply turned around and started moving toward the sound of someone calling for help. The night settled over the capital city. The soldiers kept their watch. The shelters filled with families who held their children close and spoke in quiet voices. The amber moon rose over the eastern hills and cast long shadows across the empty streets. And the signal went on broadcasting into the dark, over and over, carrying its simple message to anyone who would listen. Most of the galaxy had already decided not to. But somewhere far away, at the edge of the Orion Arm, a fleet was moving through the night between stars, and it was moving fast. The signal reached Geneva at 3:40 hours. Most of the city was asleep. The streets were quiet. The lake sat still and dark under a cloudy sky. The lights of the United Nations Defense Command building were the only bright thing on the waterfront at that hour. They were always on, always bright, because the people who worked inside them had long ago accepted that trouble does not keep regular hours. Admiral Seraphine Akafer was in the middle of a briefing when the duty officer knocked and opened the door. She was a tall woman, not tall in a way that announced itself, just tall and straight and steady, the way old trees are steady. Her hair was cut short and going gray at the edges. She wore her uniform the way she wore everything without thinking about it, because it had been part of her life for so long it was just her skin now. Her eyes were dark brown and very clear, and when she looked at you, you had the feeling she was reading something behind your face that you did not know was written there. She had been up since 200. That was normal. The duty officer handed her a printed transcript of the signal. She read it while the other people in the room waited. She read it the way she read everything, carefully, completely, without rushing. When she reached the end, she went back and read the part about the Volkai fleet again. Then she set the paper down on the table and looked at the duty officer. "Who else has it?" she asked. "Everyone," the officer said. "It's a wideband broadcast. The whole galaxy has it." "Who's responded?" The officer's mouth pressed into a thin line. "The Sovereignty is reviewing it. The Thren I sent a note. Nobody's moving." Akafer nodded once. She looked at the paper again. She looked at the coordinates. She did the math in her head. Then she stood up. "Get me the authorization codes," she said, "and wake up the fleet commanders." The briefing room went very quiet for a moment, not because people were afraid, because people were listening to the sound of something beginning. "Admiral," said one of the senior officers at the table, a man named General Foss, broad-shouldered, careful, the kind of person who liked to be sure about things before he moved. "We don't have a sovereignty mandate for this. The Kael'Vori aren't under our protection, legally speaking." "Legally speaking, 12 civilizations are gone," Akafer said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "And the 13th is asking for help. I'm going to give it to them." General Foss looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and reached for his communication device. Within 20 minutes, The building was fully awake. The UES Unbroken Promise was the largest warship Earth had ever built. It was not large the way some alien ships were large, not designed to be impressive from a distance, not built with grand curves and ornamental structures meant to signal power to other civilizations. It was large the way a working tool is large, because the job required it. Every part of it had a purpose. Every piece of its hull plating was there for a reason. It was a ship that had been built by people who understood war and were not romantic about it. Commander Darius Solano was in the middle of a training exercise when the order came through. He was in the tactical simulation room on Deck 7, working through a multi-vector defense problem with his team. He was 38 years old, dark-skinned, with a permanent small frown that was not unfriendliness but concentration, the expression of a man who was always thinking about the next problem before the current one was finished. He was very good at his job. His job was figuring out how to win fights, and he had a talent for it that went beyond training. He thought sideways. He saw angles that other tacticians missed. His teams sometimes found him frustrating to work with, because he would make a decision that looked strange, and 3 steps later it would become obvious and brilliant. When the order came through, he read it, turned to his team and said, "Pack it up, we have a real one." Nobody asked questions, they packed it up. Dr. Yumiko Hara was in her quarters reading when she received her notification. She was the ship's head of xenodiplomacy, the person responsible for communicating with alien civilizations, understanding their cultures, finding the words that built bridges instead of walls. She was a small woman with a calm face and very precise hands, and she read twice as fast as most people and forgot almost nothing. She read her notification. Then she pulled up everything in the ship's database on the Calvori. It was not a lot. The sovereignty's file on them was thin. She read it in 20 minutes and thought about it for another 10. Then she got dressed and went to work. Chief Engineer Bram Osa was already in the engine room when the order came through. This was not unusual. Bram was almost always in the engine room. He was a heavy man, not fat but dense, as if he had been built more solidly than other people. He had enormous hands that were always slightly dirty and a slow, quiet way of speaking that made people assume he was slow and quiet in his thinking too. He was not. He was one of the fastest problem solvers on the ship. He just did not feel the need to announce it. He read the order. He nodded to himself. He called his team together and told them they were moving on emergency deployment, that the drives needed to be at full readiness in 3 hours, and that anyone who needed sleep should get it now because they were not going to get much once they were underway. Then he went back to what he had been doing, which was fixing a small seal on an auxiliary power conduit that nobody else had noticed was showing early wear. He fixed it quietly and thoroughly and moved on to the next thing. The fleet assembled in the dark. Not just the Unbroken Promise. 487 ships in total, gathering from across the solar system and the near colonies. Carriers, dreadnoughts, destroyers, frigates, fast-response gunships that could cross a combat zone in seconds and hit hard before anyone had time to react. Supply ships, medical transports. Ships designed for functions that most other civilizations had not yet thought of, because humans had a way of building solutions to problems before the problems fully arrived. The gathering took 6 hours. To an outside observer, to someone watching from the sovereignty's relay stations, for example, it must have looked strange. A species that the galaxy barely paid attention to, mobilizing their entire military presence and pointing it toward a conflict that had nothing to do with them, in a star system they had no official interest in, for a people they had barely met. It would have looked strange, yes, but the crews of those 487 ships would not have found it strange at all, because they knew the story. Most of them had grown up with it. It was not a famous story in the galaxy. The sovereignty had not recorded it in any significant way, but on Earth and in every human colony, it was something people knew. It was part of the texture of things, one of those pieces of history that you absorb without being formally taught it, because the people around you carry it and it passes through the air. The story was about the Vandry Plague. In 2291, a disease had moved through the human colonies. It had started on one of the outer stations and traveled faster than anyone expected, faster than the containment teams could move. Within 8 months, it had reached Earth itself. It was killing people across every continent. The hospitals could not keep up. The research labs were running around the clock and making no progress. The projections were terrible. The most cautious estimates said that without a solution within 2 years, 30% of the human population would be gone. The less cautious estimates were worse. The sovereignty had sent notes of sympathy. But while the great powers were writing their notes, a medical transmission arrived from an unexpected source. A data package, enormous, detailed, containing biological research that human science had not yet reached. Research on immune response systems that were structurally similar to human biology. Analysis of pathogen behavior that matched the Vandry Plague's pattern almost exactly. It had come from the Kelvori. Nobody had asked them. Nobody had known they were working on it. They had received word of the plague from their own long-range monitors, and some of their scientists had looked at the biology involved and recognized something, a pattern, a connection that they were equipped to address. So they had worked on it, quietly, without announcement, and when they had something useful, they had sent it. It cost them. The sovereignty had not been pleased. The Kelvori had acted outside the official channels. There had been political consequences, slow ones, quiet ones, the kind that show up as reduced trade agreements and less favorable treatment at council meetings. The Kelvori had accepted those consequences without complaint and without explanation. The research they sent had saved 70,000 lives in the first year alone. Over time, as the treatment was refined and applied, the full count was higher. The Kelvori had never once mentioned it again. They had not done it for recognition. They had not done it as a bargaining chip. They had done it because they could, and because someone needed help, and those were sufficient reasons. The human crews who boarded their ships in those 6 hours of gathering knew all of this, not as a formal briefing, as something they had grown up knowing. The Kelvori helped us when they did not have to. They asked for nothing. They remembered them when no one was watching. Now the Kelvori were calling into the dark, and everyone was ignoring them. Not everyone. Admiral Akefer walked the length of the Unbroken Promise as it completed its final pre-jump checks. She walked the corridors the way she always did before a deployment, not inspecting exactly, just being present. She passed through the crew quarters, the medical bay, the tactical operations center, the engineering decks. She said a few words here and there. She did not give speeches. She did not rally people. The people on this ship did not need rallying. She stopped at the door to the engine room and looked in. Bram Osai was at his main console, running through his checks with the slow thoroughness that was his signature. His team moved around him efficiently and quietly. Everything looked exactly as it should. Osai looked up and saw her. He nodded once. She nodded back. That was enough. She made her way to the bridge. The bridge of the Unbroken Promise was a wide, low-lit space full of screens and quiet voices. The crew were at their stations. Everything had the feeling of coiled readiness, not tension, exactly. Readiness. The feeling of a tool that has been cared for and is ready to do its job. Solana was already at the tactical station. He had 6 screens open and was building a preliminary picture of the Kelvori system from the long-range data they had received. He had notes everywhere. He looked up when Akefer came in, gave her a brief nod, and pointed at the largest screen. 340 Volkai ships, he said. Siege formation. They've been running this pattern for about 30 years. They like to come in heavy from one side and use mass to compress the target's defense line. He paused. It works on people who think the same way they do. Akefer looked at the formation on the screen, and people who don't. Solano's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. Different story. Dr. Hara arrived on the bridge with a data pad and a quiet expression. She had spent the last few hours going through everything she could find on the Kelvori, their language, their social structures, their history. She had also gone through everything available on the Volcae, which was less about culture and more about pattern of destruction. The Kelvori don't have a strong military tradition, she said, joining them at the tactical station. They're not built for this kind of fight. Their defense force is real but small. They'll be holding on, but they won't be holding on for long. How long? Akifer asked. When we arrive, Hara calculated. Maybe hours, maybe less. Akifer nodded. Then we move fast. She walked to the command chair at the center of the bridge and sat down. Around her, the crew completed their final checks. The fleet was assembled. The drives were ready. The coordinates were locked. She looked at the main screen, where the stars ahead of them were still and quiet. The destination just a point of light among thousands of other points of light. Admiral, said the navigation officer, fleet is ready for jump. Akifer took one breath, one slow, even breath. Take us out, she said. The unbroken promise moved. Behind it, one by one, 486 other ships followed. The drives ignited in sequence, and the fleet swept forward into the jump corridor, vanishing from normal space in a long, bright line that lasted 3 seconds and then was gone. The solar system went quiet again. On the screens of the Sovereignty's monitoring stations, the departure was logged as an unusual military movement from a minor species, notable but not urgent. Someone would file a report. Someone else would read it later. But the fleet was already gone. And somewhere ahead, in the amber-lit star system of Kelvori Prime, the Volcae ships were moving into their final assault positions, and their general stood on his bridge with his hands behind his back and looked at the planet below him, and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has done this many times and expects to do it many times more. He had no idea what was coming. Nobody did. Except, perhaps, an old Kelvori elder who stood at a broken window and looked up at the stars and thought about a signal he had sent, and a ping that had come back in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He had not told anyone about it. He was keeping it quietly, the way you keep something fragile, holding it carefully so it did not break before it had the chance to become real. The night outside was dark. The moons were high. The Volcae ships were visible now with the naked eye, bright moving points of light against the stars, drawing closer with every passing minute. Sathrek watched them come. And he waited. The last hour before the bombardment was the quietest hour. On the surface of Kelvori Prime, the capital had gone mostly dark. Not a blackout, the power was still on in the shelters, still running the medical stations and the communication arrays, but the streets were empty, the market squares were empty, the long river walks that the Kelvori loved in the evenings were empty. The city felt like a held breath. General Vethdrahl stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Volcae warship Sovereign Fist, and looked at the planet below him through the wide front viewport. He was a large being. Volcae were large in general, broad, heavily built, with dark armored skin that had evolved on a high-gravity world and never quite let go of the thickness that world had demanded. Drahl was older than most of his officers, and the years had not made him soft. They had made him precise. He had been running military campaigns for 22 years. He had participated in the conquest of 6 civilizations personally. He knew how these things went. He knew the rhythms of them, the resistance that starts strong and then slowly exhausts itself. The moment when the defending forces realize they cannot win and begin to collapse. The long, careful process of turning a living civilization into a controlled territory. He found the process almost boring now. Not because it was easy. It was always difficult in the details, but it was predictable. Every civilization responded to overwhelming force in the same basic ways, They fought. They ran. They asked for help. Help did not come. They fought some more. Eventually, they stopped. Kelvori had been in the fighting stage. Now they were moving toward the asking for help stage. Draal had seen their distress signal go out. He had monitored the galaxy's response with something approaching amusement. The Threnai sent a note. The Asavari sent a longer note. Nobody moved. This was the part he had always found most useful, the moment when the defending civilization realized that the rest of the galaxy was not going to save them. That moment did more to break resistance than any weapon. He turned to his communications officer. Begin the final approach sequence. I want bombardment of the northern defense installations started within the hour. Yes, General. He turned back to the viewport. Below him, Kelvori Prime glowed amber and green in the light of its sun, quiet and small and entirely surrounded. It was going to be a short day. The first sign was on the long-range sensors. One of the Voakai sensor operators noticed it first, a fluctuation at the edge of the system's detection range. He almost dismissed it. Sensor fluctuations happened. Space was full of things that showed up briefly and then resolved into something normal. He flagged it as routine and moved on. Then the fluctuation happened again. And again. And then it stopped being a fluctuation and became a reading. 1 ship, then 5, then 20. Then the readings were coming in so fast that the system was struggling to count them individually and was starting to group them. The sensor operator stared at his screen. He checked his calibration. He ran a diagnostic. Everything was working correctly. He looked at the screen again. He picked up his communication line and called the bridge. Draal was still at the viewport when the call came through. He listened. He did not move for a moment. Then he turned around and walked to the sensor station himself. He looked at the screen. He watched the numbers resolving. He said nothing. The numbers kept climbing. They were past 100 now, past 150. The sensor system had finished its grouping calculation and was now displaying a single consolidated number at the top of the screen, updating every few seconds as new ships dropped out of jump. Past 200. Past 300. Past 400. Draal's sensor officer turned to look at him. The young officer's face was carefully controlled, but his hands had tightened on the edge of his console. General, he said quietly, 487 signatures, unknown configuration, moving into combat formation. Draal looked at the number. Then he looked at the formation the ships were taking, which the sensor overlay was beginning to map in basic geometry. It was not a defensive arc. He recognized defensive arcs. He had broken through dozens of them. Defensive arcs were what you used when you were trying to protect something. This was not a defensive arc. He knew what a hunting formation looked like too. This was that. Identification, he said. The communications officer ran the query. The answer came back in a few seconds. UES Unbroken Promise, she read. Leading vessel, United Earth Defense Command. She paused. The rest of the fleet is also registering as Earth vessels, General. Draal said the word slowly. Earth. Yes, General. He knew the name. He had a general awareness of most spacefaring civilizations in this part of the galaxy. It was useful information for a man in his position. He pulled what he knew about Earth from memory. Young species, 80 years of serious spaceflight, small presence. No major conflicts on record outside their own system, not sovereignty members in full standing. By any measure, a minor player. He looked at the 487 ships, currently arranging themselves between him and Kelvori Prime. He opened the communication channel himself. He did not usually do this. It was below his rank to speak directly to opposing forces, but he was curious. Earth vessel, he said. This system is under Voakai Dominion authority. You are in a declared military zone. Identify your purpose and withdraw immediately. A brief pause. Then a woman's voice came back, calm, clear, not aggressive. Just matter of fact in the way that people are matter of fact when they have already decided what they are doing and do not particularly need to explain themselves. This is Admiral Seraphine Akafer, United Earth Defense Command. We're here because someone asked for help. A pause that lasted exactly the right amount of time. You have 20 minutes to begin your withdrawal. After that, we will teach you what 80 years of war looks like. Draal stared at the communications console. Around him, his officers were very quiet. He had been threatened before, many times, by species that had large fleets and long histories of conflict and real military muscle behind the words. He had assessed those threats and decided which ones were real and which ones were posturing. He looked at 487 ships in a hunting formation. He thought about the 20 minutes. He had 12 civilizations behind him, 12 conquered worlds. He had not gotten to 12 by being careless with risk assessments. He looked at the formation again. He looked at the way those ships were arranged, not just the numbers, but the geometry. It was not a formation he had seen before. It did not follow any of the tactical patterns his databases contained for known spacefaring civilizations. It was something else, something that had been built from a different set of assumptions about how a fight should be structured. He did not like that. "Hold position," he said to his fleet. "Do not begin bombardment." He was not withdrawing, but he was not starting yet either. He was watching. On the unbroken promise, the 20 minutes passed in near silence. Akafer sat in her command chair. Solano stood at his tactical station with 6 screens active, watching the Volkai fleet's position updates in real time. Dr. Hara was at the communications desk, monitoring all channels. Bram Osai's voice came through on the internal line periodically with quiet engine status updates, each one the same, all systems ready. At minute 19, Solano looked up from his screens. "They're not moving," he said. "I know," Akafer said. "They think we're bluffing." "I know," she said again. The 21st minute arrived. "All fleet," Akafer said into the open channel, "execute pattern Solano 7, now." What happened next was something that Volkai sensor operators would try to describe in reports for years afterward, and never quite managed to capture correctly. The Earth fleet did not charge forward. It did not form a wall and push. It did not do any of the things that a large fleet, by conventional doctrine, was supposed to do. It split. Not into 2 parts, into 11 distinct groups of ships, each one moving in a different direction at the same moment, spreading outward from their original formation position like the fingers of a hand opening. The groups moved faster than the Volkai expected, because the Earth ships had engines built for rapid acceleration rather than sustained top speed, a design choice that made no sense until suddenly it made all the sense in the world. The Volkai fleet was large and it was powerful, and it was built for the kind of combat that most civilizations fought. 2 forces meeting head-on, mass versus mass, power against power, the heavier side eventually winning. Draal had won 12 times doing exactly that. His fleet knew how to fight that fight in their sleep. They did not know how to fight this fight. The 11 groups curved around the Volkai formation from multiple directions simultaneously. 3 of them went high above the orbital plane. 2 went deep below. The others came in from angles that the Volkai's defensive coverage had not been designed to address, because no enemy in 12 campaigns had ever moved like this. Draal's ships tried to reorient. He was fast. He was a good commander, genuinely, and he began issuing orders to split his own fleet in response. But his ships were built to hold formation, to move as a single massive fist, and breaking them into smaller groups went against everything their construction and their doctrine were designed for. The first strikes hit from 3 directions at the same moment. The Volkai had strong shields. Their armor plating was among the best in the sector. They were built to take punishment and keep functioning, But the Earth fleet did not hit them in the places their armor was strongest. The ships had been watching for 30 seconds, scanning, mapping, looking, and when they struck at the specific points where the Volkai design left gaps. Not obvious gaps, small ones. The kind that only mattered when you knew exactly where to aim. On the Kelvori surface, Elder Sathrek was watching from the communications tower. The tower's exterior screens showed a rough sensor map of the space above the planet. It was not a perfect picture. The Kelvori's sensor equipment was limited, but it showed the broad shapes of what was happening. He could see the large mass of the Volkai fleet. He could see the smaller, faster shapes of the Earth ships moving around it like water moving around a stone, not hitting it straight on, but finding every crack and flowing into it. The young soldier who had been assigned to stand with him, a private named Teva, barely 20 years old, with bright amber eyes and a way of holding her weapon like she was trying to convince herself it would be enough, watched the screen with wide eyes. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. The elder was quiet for a moment. He watched one of the Earth ships perform a maneuver that made no logical sense until it suddenly revealed a Volkai vessel's unprotected flank, and then it made complete sense. "The ones we helped," he said, "a long time ago." Teva looked at him, then she looked back at the screen. "They came," she said. It was not quite a question. It was the sound of someone watching something they had mostly stopped believing in becoming real in front of them. "They came," Sathrek said. The battle lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. There were moments when it was not going well. 3 Earth ships were destroyed in the first 40 minutes. The Volkai were not helpless, and their weapons were powerful, and in the sections of the fight where they managed to get Earth vessels into the kind of direct confrontation they were built for, they were dangerous. 14 people died on the destroyer UES Resolute when a Volkai energy burst found a seam in its hull. The UES Meridian took heavy damage to its engine section and had to pull back from the line. The crew of the small frigate Crosswind held their position for 20 minutes against 3 Volkai ships twice their size, buying time for a flanking group to get into position, and when the flanking group arrived, the Crosswind had taken damage to 11 of its 14 systems and was running on reserve power, but it was still there. On the tactical station of the Unbroken Promise, Solano was everywhere at once. Not physically, he stayed at his station, his hands moving across his screens, his voice calm and continuous on the fleet channels, but his mind was in every corner of the fight. He was watching patterns. He was watching how the Volkai were adapting. Every time they found a new response to the Earth fleet's movements, Solano was already building the counter to it before they finished implementing it. He was 2 steps ahead, and staying there through sheer concentrated thinking. "Group 7, pull left," he said into his channel. "Don't let them establish that angle. Group 7 left now, and Group 3 swing wide to cover the gap." The ships moved. The gap closed. A Volkai flanking attempt collapsed before it formed. Akafar watched the tactical picture evolve. She gave direction on the big decisions and left the fine details to Solano, because that was the right way to use him and she knew it. She watched the Volkai numbers. She watched them take hits and absorb them and come back. She watched them take hits and not absorb them and slow down. She watched the ratio shifting slowly in one direction. In the engine room, Bram Osai was managing a crisis that most of the ship did not know about. The third direct hit the Unbroken Promise had taken had sent a shockwave through the secondary power distribution system. Nothing catastrophic, but 2 relays were showing stress fractures, and if they failed, it would reduce the ship's main drive output by 30%. 30% reduced drive output meant 30% reduced maneuverability. 30% reduced maneuverability at this point in the fight could matter. Os had 3 engineers on it. He was also on it himself, his large hands moving with a delicacy that seemed impossible given their size. Replacing a relay component while the ship continued its combat maneuvers around him, and the deck shook every few minutes from weapons fire. He finished, He ran the diagnostic. The fractures were contained. He keyed his line to the bridge. Engine systems nominal, he said. On the bridge, nobody knew anything had been wrong. The turning point came at the 3-hour mark. The Volkai fleet had been slowly compressing under the pressure of the Earth formation, not because they had broken, but because they were being systematically cut off from each other. The 11 groups had been, over 3 hours, very carefully herding. The casual observer watching the battle might have thought it was chaotic. It was not. It was a slow, patient, deliberate process of reduction. Each move had been building toward a specific geometry. At 3 hours and 4 minutes, that geometry was complete. The Volkai fleet was, for the first time in any of its 12 campaigns, completely surrounded. Not just outmaneuvered, not just under pressure from multiple sides, completely enclosed in a sphere of Earth vessels, every escape angle covered, every retreat path blocked by a ship or a group of ships positioned exactly to cut it off. Draal stood at his tactical station and looked at the display and understood what had happened. He had been managed. For 3 hours, this fleet of Earth ships, this young species, this minor civilization, these 80-year spaceflight newcomers had been managing him, moving him, not fighting him directly, but guiding him slowly, patiently, step by step, into exactly the position they wanted him in. He had not seen it happening. He saw it now. His flagship had taken significant damage. His fleet had lost 40 vessels, not destroyed mostly, but damaged enough to pull out of the fight. The remaining 300 ships were inside a sphere of Earth vessels, and the Earth vessels were moving inward. Draal stood very still for a long moment. He was not a man who felt fear easily, but he was a man who knew when a calculation had gone wrong. He had built his career on honest assessments of situations. The honest assessment of this situation was clear. He opened the channel to his fleet. His voice, when it came, was different from the voice he had used at the start of the day. Not broken, not panicked, just quieter. "All vessels," he said, "fall back." The sovereign fist turned. Behind it, the Volkai fleet turned with it. They moved for the edge of the system, and the Earth ships let them go, not out of mercy, exactly, but because Akafar had given specific orders that pursuit beyond the system boundary was not the objective. The objective was the Kael'Vori system. The objective was the planet below. The objective was already achieved. On the surface of Kael'Vori Prime, Teva watched the Volkai ships moving away on the screen. She watched until the last one cleared the edge of the sensor map. Then she turned to Elder Sathrek. He was still looking at the screen. His old gold eyes were very calm and very bright. "Is it over?" Teva asked. "This part," he said. Above them, in the quiet of the now empty orbital space, the Earth fleet began to regroup. Ships moved back to formation. The damaged ones were flagged. The ones that needed help received it. The communications channels opened up, not for tactical commands anymore, but for damage reports, crew checks, the practical business of taking stock of what had just happened. On the unbroken Promise, Admiral Akafar sat in her command chair and looked at the main screen, where Kael'Vori Prime turned slowly in the light of its amber sun. Green and quiet, and for the moment safe. Solano came to stand beside her. 41 Volkai ships in retreat, he said, remaining 300 withdrawing. Long-range tracking shows them clearing the system. He paused. We lost 14 people. The Meridian will need major repair. The Crosswind crew is all accounted for. They're banged up, but nobody's gone. Akafar listened to all of this. She nodded. Get me a channel to the surface, she said. The communications officer opened it. Akafar leaned forward slightly. Kael'Vori Prime, this is Admiral Akafar, United Earth Defense Command. The Volkai fleet has withdrawn from your system. We are in orbit. We are not leaving until you tell us to. Is there anything you need right now? A long pause. Then a voice came through. Old, careful, carrying inside it something that was too large to fully express in words. "Yes," said Elder Sathrek, "we need our people to know that it is safe to come home." Akefer closed her eyes for just a moment. "Tell them," she said, "it's safe." The day after was gray and still. A light rain fell on the capital city of Kelvori Prime, soft and steady, the kind of rain that does not ask anything of you, just falls and makes everything quiet. The empty streets filled slowly as people came out of the shelters. They came out carefully at first, the way people do when they have been afraid for a long time and are not quite ready to stop being afraid. They stepped into the open air and looked up at the sky and looked at the buildings that were still standing and at the ones that were not. The northern district had taken some damage from the early bombardment. Before the Earth fleet arrived, the Voakai had already begun their work. 3 buildings were rubble. The road leading to the main river crossing had a long black scar across it from an energy strike that had hit the pavement and kept going. 2 of the public gardens that the Kelvori kept with great care were burned on one side, the old trees there reduced to bare black shapes against the gray sky. People looked at these things. They did not make much noise. They just looked, and then they began to move, some toward the shelters to check on family, some toward the damaged areas with tools and hands, already beginning the process of figuring out what could be fixed and what had to be rebuilt. Sathrek walked through the city in the morning rain. He was tired in the way you are tired after something big has happened, not sleepy exactly, but emptied out, like a container that has been filled and then poured. He had not slept. He had been on communication lines all night, coordinating with the Planetary Defense Command, with the remaining sovereignty channels that were now suddenly very interested in talking to him, with his own staff. He had also received a request from the Earth Fleet. Admiral Akafer wished to send a diplomatic representative to the surface for a formal first contact meeting. He had replied that he would be honored, and named the time and place himself. The old assembly room at the base of the communications tower, the next morning, at the hour when the amber sun came over the eastern hills. He arrived early. Dr. Yumiko Hara came down in a shuttle with 2 other crew members and 1 security officer who walked behind her and tried to look inconspicuous and did not quite manage it. She carried nothing except a small data pad and the knowledge she had been building since the signal first came through. The city she descended into was beautiful even in its damaged state. She could see that, the way the low curved buildings sat together, the design of the wide river walks, the careful way the Kelvori had arranged their public spaces so that every open area had both sun and shade. It was a city built by people who thought about where they put things and why. She noted all of this in the way she noted everything, with genuine interest rather than professional cataloging. Sathrek was waiting at the door of the assembly room when she arrived. He was older than she had expected, though she was not sure why she had expected anything specific. He was tall for a Kelvori, with deep green scales and eyes that were old and clear, and looked at her with a directness that she found immediately comfortable. He bowed in the Kelvori formal style, a slow dip of the head with both hands held forward, open. She had practiced this. She returned it as correctly as she could. Something in his face shifted slightly, not surprise exactly, more like a note being taken. They went inside and sat across a low table from each other. Tea was brought, a Kelvori drink, amber and light, that tasted like warm wood and something faintly sweet. Hara accepted it and held the cup in both hands because that was what the cultural file had told her was respectful, and she saw him notice that too. For a while they talked through the practical things, the immediate humanitarian needs of the planet. What the Earth Fleet could provide, medical supplies, they had brought those, knowing they would be needed. Engineering support for the structural damage. Communications assistance. These were easier things to talk about. They had clean answers. They could be handled. Then the practical part was finished, and a small silence sat between them. Sathrek looked at her for a moment. He wrapped his long hands around his own cup. "I want to ask you something directly," he said. His voice was careful and considered, as if each word was being placed down rather than spoken. "I would like an honest answer, not a diplomatic one." "I'll do my best," Hara said. "Why did you come?" he asked. "Not the political explanation, not the official language. We are a small people. We are nothing in the scale of the galaxy. We have no resources that Earth needs. We have no strategic value to you. The sovereignty was not going to thank you for this, and they did not. You spent ships and lives in a system that you have no official connection to." He looked at her steadily. "I have spent the night trying to understand, and I cannot find the calculation that makes this make sense." Hara set her cup down. She had thought about how to answer this question since before the fleet left Earth. She had gone through several versions, careful versions, diplomatic versions, versions that framed it as policy or principle or strategic long-term thinking. She had dismissed all of them on the shuttle down. He had asked for honesty. She would give him honesty. "In 2291, she said, "we had a plague." She watched his face. Something moved behind his eyes. "It was killing us," she continued. "Our research was not fast enough. We asked the sovereignty for help and received notes of concern. We asked every spacefaring civilization we had contact with. Nobody moved." She paused. "And then a data package arrived. Biological research, exactly what we needed. It came from Kelvori Prime. No warning, no introduction, no request for anything in return. Just the research, and it saved us." Sathrek was very still. "We know what it cost you politically," Hara said. "The sovereignty reduced your trade access. Your council seat was downgraded. You were penalized for acting outside official channels." She looked at him directly. "You never complained. You never told anyone what you had done. You just accepted the consequences and moved on." A long pause. "How do you know about the consequences?" he asked quietly. "Because we paid attention," she said. "We were the ones you helped. We made it our business to understand what happened to you because of it. We watched. For 96 years, we watched. We were not powerful enough to do much about it for a long time, but we remembered." Sathrek set his cup down on the table. He looked at it. "There are people alive on Earth today," Hara continued more quietly, "who are only alive because of something your scientists did. Their children are alive. Their grandchildren. 70,000 in the first year. More after that. They don't know your name. They don't know where the research came from, but they are alive." She let that sit for a moment. "You didn't think anyone was watching. You did it anyway. That matters." The assembly room was quiet. Outside, the rain continued its soft work. Somewhere in the street, the sound of people beginning to move things and fix things drifted in through the old walls. Sathrek looked up. "We did not do it expecting anything," he said. "We know," Hara said. "That's part of why we came." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his cup again. His hands, she noticed, were not quite steady. "Our people have a word," he said. "There is no good translation. It means approximately the debt that exists between those who have helped each other, even when neither one knew they were building it." He looked at the table. "I did not think it still applied to us. After so long, I thought we had been forgotten." "Not by us," Hara said. He nodded once, slowly, with a heaviness that was not sadness but something weightier, the feeling of putting down something you have carried for a very long time. They sat together in the quiet room while the rain fell outside, and for a while neither of them spoke, because there was nothing more that needed to be said just then. 3 days after the battle, Admiral Akafer was summoned to speak before a special emergency session of the Galactic Sovereignty Council. She attended via long-range communication link from the bridge of the Unbroken Promise, her image appearing on the council chamber's main screen as a live transmission. The council chamber was a vast circular room on the Sovereignty's central station, and it was full. Every major member civilization had sent representatives. Some of them had not been in the same room together for years. The session opened formally. The Sovereignty's presiding officer, a Threnai diplomat named Ambassador Kale, tall and silver-skinned and possessed of a voice like polished stone, outlined the situation. The United Earth Defense Command had, without authorization, entered a declared military zone and engaged a foreign power. This was a violation of sovereignty protocol. There were members present who wished to discuss sanctions. There were members present who wished to discuss Earth's status within the broader sovereignty framework. There were members who had quite strong feelings about a species that had been largely peripheral now, inserting itself into galactic affairs in this manner. HFY listened to all of this without expression. When Ambassador Kale invited her to respond, she leaned forward slightly toward the communication lens. "Thank you," she said. "I would like to put something in front of the Council." She nodded to the communications officer on the Unbroken Promise, who transmitted a document to the Council Chamber's display system. It appeared on the main screens for every member to see. It was a list. A long list, 12 items. Each item was the name of a civilization, a species, a world, a culture, followed by 2 columns of data. In the first column, the date their distress signal had been received by the sovereignty. In the second column, the sovereignty's response. Pending review, pending review, pending review, under assessment, diplomatic note sent, pending review. 12 names, 12 responses, 12 civilizations that were now either conquered, destroyed, or absorbed into the Vaukai Dominion. The council chamber was very quiet. HFY let them look at it for a full minute. She did not rush. "I want to be clear," she said, when the minute was done. "I am not here to accuse this council of cowardice or bad faith. I understand that the sovereignty is a complex body with competing interests and significant political constraints. I understand that unilateral military action creates precedents that are legitimately concerning. I understand all of that." She paused. But 12 civilizations asked for help, and nobody came. And when the 13th asked for help, we came, and the Vaukai fleet withdrew. Another pause. "You are within your rights to sanction us. You are within your rights to review our status in the sovereignty framework. You can do whatever the rules of this council allow you to do." She looked directly into the communication lens so that her eyes met the screen in the council chamber as directly as possible. "But we will tell you this. The next time a signal comes in from any species in any system, we will answer it. We will answer the one after that. We will keep answering. That is not a threat. It is a statement of what we are and what we do." She sat back. Ambassador Kale looked at her across several light minutes of space. The silence in the council chamber lasted a long time. In the end, no sanctions were formally proposed. Several members requested additional discussions. Several others quietly moved to update their own emergency communication protocols. The session was closed without resolution, which in sovereignty terms often meant that the matter had been quietly set aside because nobody had found a good argument for the opposing position. HFY closed the communication link and sat in the quiet of her bridge. Solano came to stand beside her. He had listened to the whole thing. "You think they'll call again," he said, "meaning the council, meaning the sovereignty." "Eventually," she said. And we'll go to those too." He nodded. He almost said something else. Then he just nodded again and went back to his station. In the engine room, Bram Osai was filing his post-engagement maintenance report. The hull fracture from before the battle, the one he had patched during the FTL jump, he listed under routine maintenance, noting only the repair type and materials used. He filled in the date, initialed the form, and moved on to the next item. His supervisor would review the report the following week and notice nothing unusual. On the 4th day, a young Kelvori soldier came to find Elder Sathrek. It was the same young soldier who had stood beside him during the battle, Teva. She found him in his office, working through the long stack of administrative tasks that a crisis always leaves behind it. He looked up when she knocked. "What is it?" he said. She was holding something. A printed document, the kind that humans apparently used for official correspondence, off-white paper with text in 2 languages. She held it out to him. "It came from their fleet," she said, "for me." He took it and read it. It was a notification, an application received, a process begun. He read it twice, then he looked up at her. "You applied to their defense command," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment, at her amber eyes and her straight posture and the way she held herself, not quite a soldier yet, but almost. He thought about the night she had stood beside him watching the battle unfold on the screen, asking who those ships were. "They have offices on 3 colony stations," she said. "I found the application process through the communications officer on the Earth ship that was doing our repair assessment. She helped me." A small pause. "I want to do what they do." Sathrek looked at the document. He looked at the name of the agency printed at the top. United Earth Defense Command. He thought of the 487 ships that had come from nowhere, from a species that owed them nothing, to stand between his people and the worst thing they had ever faced. He handed the document back. "Then do it," he said. She took it carefully. She bowed the deep formal bow, not the quick one. Then she left. Sathrek looked at the empty doorway for a moment. Then he looked out the window at the city, where the rain had stopped and the amber sun was beginning to come through the clouds, touching the curve of the river and the tops of the low buildings and the people in the streets who were still, slowly, coming home. He thought about a ping that had come back in 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He thought about what that meant. He thought about the young soldier walking out of his office with a document in her hands and something new in her eyes. He turned back to his desk. He had a lot of work to do. And somewhere across the city, in the small temporary offices the Earth fleet had set up on the ground, a communications officer from the Sovereignty's relay station handed over her resignation and pulled up a different application form entirely. Her name was Velnoma, and she had gray skin and large dark eyes and a very precise way of noticing things that most people missed, and she had made her decision quietly and completely during the 4 days since the battle, without drama and without regret. She filled out the form carefully, double-checking every answer. She submitted it. Then she sat back in her chair and looked out the window at the amber sky over Kelvori Prime, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 1 year was enough time to see what had changed. Some things had changed completely. Some had barely changed at all. The galaxy was large and old and slow to move, and one battle in one star system, even a battle that had sent the Voakai Dominion retreating for the first time in 3 decades, was not enough to remake it all at once. The Sovereignty still met. The Council still deliberated. The great powers still wrote careful diplomatic notes and assessed political costs, and moved with the measured slowness of institutions that have existed for centuries and intend to exist for centuries more. But things had changed, quietly, in the way that important things often change not all at once, but in the accumulation of small shifts, each one barely noticeable alone, that add up over time to something different. The Voakai Dominion had gone quiet. Not silent, they were still there, still a power in their region, still the most dangerous military force in the sector by most measures, but they had not moved. In the 12 months since the retreat from Kelvori Prime, there had been no new campaigns, no new signals of imminent attack against any neighboring civilizations. Their fleet had returned to their core systems and stayed there. Their diplomatic channels, usually silent, had begun, tentatively, to show some activity. Quiet conversations. Exploratory messages. Nothing significant yet, but the pattern of 30 years of constant expansion had, for the first time, paused. Analysts at the Sovereignty spent a great deal of time trying to explain this. Some argued that the Voakai were simply recalculating, gathering new resources, preparing for the next campaign more carefully. Some argued that the loss at Kelvori Prime had damaged their military credibility internally, and that there were political struggles happening within the Dominion that the outside galaxy could not yet see. Some argued that the Voakai, for the first time, had genuinely uncertain information, an unknown force, an unpredictable tactical style, a species they could not model, and that they were waiting until they understood what they were dealing with. All of these analyses might have been correct. They might all have been partially correct. What was certain was the result. For 1 year, the Voakai had not attacked anyone. 3 civilizations that had been quietly watching the Voakai's advance and calculating how much time they had left before the ships arrived at their borders were still intact. Their people were still alive. Their cities were still standing. For now, the gap held. On Kelvori Prime, they built a monument. It was not a military monument. There were no weapons depicted in it, no ships, no representations of battle. The artist who designed it, a young Kelvori sculptor named Myra, who had spent the battle in a shelter with her 2 children and had come out of the experience with something clear and specific to say, had spent 3 months on the design and rejected 17 versions before she arrived at the final one. It was a simple thing in the end. A sphere of dark stone representing a planet. Not specifically Kelvori Prime, any planet, all planets. Beside it, carved in relief on a long panel of pale stone, a single line reaching inward from the edge, the universal visual shorthand for a signal being sent into space. And at the tip of that line, not an explosion or a fleet or a dramatic image of salvation, but a small, clean symbol, a hand open. The inscription ran along the base of the panel in 2 languages. Kelvori first, then, below it, in English, which had been included because the sculptor felt it was right, because the monument was as much for the ones who came as for the ones who called. The inscription read, "They did not know us, they came anyway." Sathrek attended the unveiling ceremony on a warm afternoon in the early part of the Kelvori spring. The amber sun was high, and the moons were just visible on the western horizon, and the air smelled of the flowers that grew along the river. Several hundred people had gathered. Most of them were quiet during the ceremony, the way people are quiet when they are trying to hold something large inside themselves. Some of the Earth crew were there. Admiral Akafer had returned to the system for the ceremony. She stood at the edge of the gathered crowd in her uniform, alone except for Solano, who stood beside her with his hands behind his back, and his expression quiet and unreadable in the way it always was when he was thinking about something deeply. Dr. Hara stood closer to the front, near Sathrek, having built enough of a relationship with him over the past year that standing close felt natural. When the cloth came down and the monument was revealed, Myra stood beside it with her 2 children, old enough now to walk and look around and not fully understand yet. And Sathrek read the inscription aloud in Kelvori, and someone else read it in English, and then there was a long silence that was not empty but full. Akafer looked at the inscription. She read it. She did not say anything. She stood there for a moment with the warm spring air moving around her and looked at those words, and what she felt was too complicated and too personal to describe, so she did not try to describe it to anyone. She just stood there and let it be what it was. Solano beside her also said nothing. After a moment he cleared his throat quietly, ready to head back up. "1 more minute," she said. He nodded, he waited. She took her 1 more minute. Then she turned and they walked back toward the shuttle landing area, and the monument stood where it had been placed, and the people of Kelvori Prime moved around it, and some of them stopped to read it, and some of them just touched the stone with their hands for a moment before they moved on. On Earth, a girl watched footage. She was 9 years old. Her name was Adiz, and she lived in the eastern part of Lagos, and she had found the footage on her tablet in the way children find things, not by searching for it specifically, but by following a chain of curiosity from one thing to another until she arrived somewhere unexpected. The footage was not classified. The United Earth Defense Command had released an official record of the Kelvori mission, partial footage from external hull cameras, sensor logs, some audio. The dramatic part, the moment the fleet dropped out of FTL into the Kelvori system, was a sequence that had been shared across every network, in every language, on every inhabited world that humans touched. 487 ships dropping out of jump space in sequence, the stars visible behind them, the amber glow of Kelvori Prime below, the fleet arranging itself into formation, moving with the kind of coordinated purpose that looked almost beautiful even when you understood what it was for. The whole sequence lasted about 90 seconds of real time, captured from a camera on the trailing edge of the destroyer Resolute, wide angle, sharp. Adiz watched it 3 times. She watched it a 4th time more slowly. She was not entirely sure what she was feeling. She was 9 and she did not yet have all the words for all the feelings. But there was something in it that grabbed at something inside her and would not let go. The ships moving, the formation taking shape, the sense, the clear, visible sense of purpose, of people who knew why they were doing something and were doing it completely. She watched it a 5th time. Then she put down her tablet and looked at the ceiling of her room for a while and thought about the things she wanted to be when she was old enough to be things. She had already had 3 different answers to that question over the past 2 years. None of them had stuck. They had all been interesting for a while and then become something else, something that felt more like the right answer the longer she thought about it. She was beginning to think she had her answer now. She picked up the tablet again and pulled up the United Earth Defense Command's public information page, the one she had found linked from the footage. It had sections for recruitment, for academy programs, for youth interest registration. There was a section for educational programs starting as young as 12. She read that section carefully. Then she closed the tablet and went to find her mother, because there were some things you wanted to tell someone else before they became fully real inside you. The unbroken promise returned to regular patrol duty 6 weeks after the Kelvori ceremony. Their assigned area was a wide stretch of space at the edge of the contested zone, the border region between sovereignty space and the sectors that were either ungoverned or under Volkai influence. It was not a quiet posting. There were things to watch, things to respond to, the constant work of maintaining a presence in a region that needed one. The crew settled back into the rhythms of patrol duty, watch rotations, maintenance schedules, training exercises, the small domestic rituals that keep a ship's community healthy over long deployments. Solano ran his tactical exercises. Hara maintained the communication protocols with the nearby inhabited systems. Bram Os tended to the engine room with the same steady thoroughness he always gave it, fixing things before they became problems, leaving no report empty, keeping the great ship running exactly as it should. Akefer ran the ship. She ran it the way she ran everything, with directness and care, paying attention, making decisions cleanly, not wasting the trust her crew gave her. She knew each of her people well enough to know when they were tired and when they were sharp, and when they needed something she could give, and when they needed something she could not. She took care of them the way a good commander takes care of their people, which is to say constantly, and without making it look like effort. Teva had completed the first stage of her application process and was, as of 3 months ago, officially enrolled in a preliminary training program at the Earth Colony Station on the edge of the sector. Sathrek had sent Akafer a short message when the enrollment was confirmed. The message said only, "Thank you for leaving the door open." Akafer had read it and written back. She opened it herself. The patrol continued. The weeks moved. The space around them was quiet in the specific way that borders are quiet, not peaceful exactly, but watchful, tending. And then at 2:17 hours on a Tuesday, the signal came. It arrived on the standard wideband frequency, the kind that was used specifically when you wanted to reach as many people as possible because you were not sure who was listening and you needed someone to hear you. The communications officer on night watch caught it first and ran it through the translation protocols, and then called the duty officer, and the duty officer read it and called the bridge. Akafar was on the bridge in 7 minutes. She was not fully dressed. She had her jacket open and her hair not yet in its usual order, but her eyes were clear and fully awake. She read the message. Unknown species, coordinates attached, a brief plain description of the situation, ships surrounding them, no allies nearby, time running out. The message was not well written. The translation was rough, but the meaning was not complicated. Someone was surrounded and afraid and calling for help because they had no other options. The coordinates resolved on the navigational chart, 6 weeks away at maximum FTL. Akafar looked at the message for a moment. Then she looked up. "Get me fleet command," she said, "and plot the course." The communications officer opened the line. The navigation officer pulled up the chart. Around the bridge, the night watch crew moved into the quiet efficiency that comes from having done something before and being ready to do it again. Solano arrived on the bridge 4 minutes later, partially dressed, one sleeve still unbuttoned. He looked at the navigation chart. He looked at the coordinates. He was already thinking, she could see it in his face, the sideways working quality of his thinking, beginning to map the space around the unknown coordinates, building preliminary pictures. Dr. Hara arrived a minute after that. She went straight to the communications station and pulled up the raw signal. She would start building a language profile immediately. 6 weeks was not a lot of time, but it was enough to learn basic patterns. It was enough to arrive ready to speak. In the engine room, Bram Osai received the order to prepare for extended high-speed transit. He put down the coolant seal he had been inspecting and called his team. His voice was the same as always, slow, steady, carrying no particular drama. "We're moving," he said. "Make it ready." On the bridge, Akafar confirmed the course and looked at the main screen. The stars ahead were still and bright in the dark, and somewhere among them, 6 weeks away, an unknown species was calling into the void because they had no one else to call. They did not know anything about Earth. They did not know anything about the humans who were now reading their words. They did not know about Kelvori Prime, or the battle that had been fought there, or the monument that stood in a spring city with an inscription in 2 languages. They did not know about the girl in Lagos who was reading about recruitment programs. They did not know about a young Kelvori soldier beginning her training at a colony station on the edge of the sector. They did not know about any of it. They only knew they were afraid, and there was no one coming. They were wrong about that last part. The unbroken promise moved. Its drives engaged with a deep, clean sound that traveled through the hull and into the feet of everyone aboard. The stars ahead shifted as the ship accelerated, pulling toward the jump corridor that would take them to the unknown coordinates on the navigation chart. Other ships began to move behind it. The fleet assembled in the dark the way it always did, not slowly, not with ceremony, but with the practiced speed of people who have done this before and understand what it means. Ship after ship, falling into formation, drives igniting one after another in the dark of deep space. Akafar watched them assemble on the rear view display. All those ships, all those people, moving toward the sound of someone who had called for help and did not expect an answer. She turned back to the forward view. The jump corridor opened. And somewhere, in a part of the galaxy that no human had ever visited, in a star system whose name they did not yet know, a people sat in the dark and waited and were afraid, not yet knowing that 487 drives had just ignited on their behalf, not yet knowing that something old and stubborn and impossibly loyal to the idea of showing up was already moving through the stars toward them. They thought no one would come. They were wrong. They had always been wrong about that. Because there was one species in the galaxy, young and sometimes foolish, and sometimes frightened and sometimes mistaken, and never ever perfect, that had made a decision a long time ago, so deep inside itself that it was not a policy or a strategy or a doctrine, but simply a fact about what they were. That when someone calls for help, you answer. You answer the first call. You answer the call after that. You keep answering. And so the fleet moved through the dark between stars, and the galaxy turned slowly around them. And far behind, on a warm green planet bathed in amber light, a monument stood in the spring air with an inscription in 2 languages, and the river caught the sun and turned it to gold. And somewhere above, among all the cold, bright stars, something was moving toward the sound of fear with open hands. Answering. Always answering.